In the remote, snow-covered mountains of Alaska, 28-year-old Maya, an adventurous solo hiker and nature enthusiast, found herself caught in an unexpected blizzard. The sky had been clear when she set out that morning, her spirits high, and her gear meticulously prepared for a day of exploration. But by noon, the winds howled, and snow fell so heavily that visibility was nearly zero. Maya's heart pounded as the cold bit through her jacket, the bitter chill seeping through every layer. Her map had become a useless, soggy mess, and her GPS struggled to connect in the harsh, frigid conditions. Every direction seemed the same, an endless sea of white. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, the realization of her isolation intensifying with each misstep. As panic began to set in, a dark shape emerged through the swirling snow. A small, dilapidated cabin. Desperation overrode caution, and she stumbled toward it, the freezing wind pushing against her as if the wilderness itself resisted her escape. Inside, the cabin was abandoned, yet offered respite from the relentless storm. The air was stale, and a thin layer of frost clung to the corners of the window panes. Shivering uncontrollably, Maya's fingers struggled to undo the straps of her backpack. Her gloved hands fumbled as she reached for the emergency blanket stashed at the bottom of her pack. Wrapping it tightly around her, she sank onto a worn-out wooden chair, the weight of fear and exhaustion pressing down. Gradually, as her fingers thawed and her breathing steadied, Maya heard a sound, a faint, whimpering cry that barely cut through the howling wind outside. Confused, she strained her ears, uncertain if her mind played tricks, but the sound came again, weak yet persistent. Following the noise, she discovered a husky pup curled up in the corner, shivering and alone. Its blue eyes met hers, a mix of fear and hope that mirrored her own vulnerability. For a moment, they stared at each other, two lost souls seeking shelter from the storm. The pup's coat was matted, clumps of ice clinging to its fur. Carefully, Maya extended her hand, her voice a gentle whisper. "Hey, buddy. It's okay. I won't hurt you." The pup hesitated, its ears twitching at the unfamiliar sound of kindness. Slowly, it inched closer, its small body trembling. Maya's heart ached with empathy, a reflection of her own fear and desperation in the creature's frightened gaze. She carefully gathered the pup into her arms, its icy fur pressing against her cheek. The warmth of the tiny heartbeat steadied her own, grounding her in this moment of shared vulnerability. She searched her backpack for any source of food, finding only a half-eaten protein bar. Breaking off a small piece, she offered it to the pup, who sniffed cautiously before accepting it. The fragile trust between them grew as the minutes passed, the cabin's silence broken only by the muffled roar of the storm outside. Time slipped by, slowly as Maya and the pup huddled together. The blizzard raged with a ferocity that seemed unending. Every attempt Maya made to peer outside revealed only a wall of white, the cabin their fragile sanctuary. The uncertainty of how long the storm would last gnawed at her, but the steady presence of the pup offered a semblance of comfort. As dusk approached, the pale light dimming behind the veil of snow, Maya adjusted her emergency blanket, wrapping a portion of it around the pup. The creature looked up at her, a flicker of gratitude in its icy blue eyes. In that moment, Maya realized they weren't just two beings trapped by circumstance, they were each other's chance of survival. Exhaustion settled heavily upon Maya, the adrenaline of fear giving way to the weariness of the day's ordeal. She allowed her eyes to close, her breathing synchronized with the pup's gentle rise and fall. The cabin creaked softly, a tired skeleton defying the storm's wrath. The snowstorm, fierce and unyielding, raged on into the night, but within the small dilapidated cabin, A fragile bond of warmth and hope formed against the chill of isolation. The hours stretched on, the relentless storm battering the cabin's worn-out walls. Each gust of wind sent a shiver through the structure, a reminder of how vulnerable they were. The pup, pressed close to Maya's side, seemed to understand the fragility of their refuge. She wondered about the pup's story, how it had ended up in this forsaken place, alone and trembling. Had it been abandoned by a previous owner, or had it wandered away from a pack or a family? The thought of abandonment stirred something painful in Maya. The concept of being lost, not just physically but emotionally, resonated deeply with her. She had taken this solo hiking trip not just for adventure but to escape the lingering ache of a recent breakup, the end of a relationship that had left her feeling adrift, searching for purpose in the vast, uncharted wilderness of her own heart. In an attempt to distract herself from the weight of her thoughts, Maya began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. The wooden floor creaked under her weight, each step stirring up dust and memories of those who had likely taken refuge here before her. An old, rusted stove sat in one corner, its pipe leading out through a crooked hole in the wall. Nearby, a pile of dried, brittle wood lay stacked, perhaps a remnant of someone's hurried departure. Tentatively, Maya gathered a few pieces and attempted to light a fire. Her hands trembled from the cold, but after several tries, a spark caught, and a small flame flickered to life. The fire's warmth gradually filled the cramped space, its crackling a soothing balm against the harsh storm outside. The pup, sensing the heat, curled up closer, its body pressing against Maya's legs. She stroked its fur gently, feeling the matted clumps give way to softness beneath. "I think I'll call you Blizzard," she whispered, a wry smile breaking through her fatigue. The name seemed fitting, a reminder of their shared ordeal, yet also a symbol of their resilience. Maya and the pup, whom she named Storm, became companions in their unplanned isolation. The snowstorm persisted, trapping them inside the cabin for days. Outside, the winds howled relentlessly, carrying with them a biting chill that seeped through the crevices of the old wooden walls. Inside, the air was cold but bearable, and the companionship of the small, resilient husky kept Maya grounded in a situation that could have easily spiraled into hopelessness. In those days of silence and survival, Maya's thoughts often wandered to the life she had temporarily left behind, a life marked by the relentless pressure of urban living, expectations, and unfulfilled dreams. The solitude of the mountains had been a desperate attempt to escape the chaos, to rediscover herself amid nature's grandeur. Instead, she had found herself trapped in a different kind of isolation, yet one that carried a fragile sense of purpose in the presence of Storm. Storm, as she had named the pup after the blizzard that brought them together, gradually regained energy. His ribs were still visible beneath his matted fur, but his eyes began to reflect a spark of life. At first, he was wary of Maya's every move, uncertain whether to trust her completely. Gradually, though, he began to seek her out, nudging her hand for warmth, curling beside her on the makeshift bed she had fashioned from her extra clothes. Each night they huddled close, their combined warmth fending off the cabin's biting cold. Maya rationed her supplies carefully, breaking protein bars in half and melting snow for water. Storm initially hesitated at the unfamiliar taste of processed food, his instincts still aligned with the wild, but hunger eventually won. His timid acceptance of the offerings was a reminder of their shared vulnerability. The sight of him slowly trusting her, his tail wagging slightly as he approached, brought a sense of fulfillment that Maya hadn't felt in a long time. When the storm allowed, they ventured outside, Maya cautiously assessing the snow-covered terrain while Storm bounded ahead, his youthful energy cutting through the crisp air. She gathered firewood from fallen branches, careful to avoid areas where the snow had piled too high. Each outing was brief but essential, a calculated risk to sustain them until the blizzard passed. Storm's companionship made these excursions less daunting. His presence, a lively contrast to the desolate white landscape, reminded her that she was not completely alone. Inside the cabin, Maya found solace in small routines, organizing her limited belongings, checking the remaining food supplies, and mapping out potential escape routes when the storm finally subsided. She spoke aloud sometimes, her voice breaking the oppressive silence. Often, she spoke to Storm, sharing fragmented thoughts and memories. The pup listened with quiet attentiveness, his head tilted as if genuinely interested. During the long, dark nights, Maya's mind wandered to her family, her parents, who had never fully understood her need to wander, and her friends, who had settled into predictable lives of stability and routine. She wondered if they would worry, if they even knew where she was. The thought of their concern pulled at her, a thread of guilt woven into the fabric of her independence. As the days blended together, Maya began to realize that her survival was no longer solely about her. Storm had become a part of her world, a creature reliant on her care. The responsibility grounded her, a purpose beyond her own fear. Her thoughts, once trapped in cycles of doubt, began to focus on the logistics of their survival, keeping warm, conserving food, and finding a way back to safety once the storm abated. On a particularly clear morning, when the storm had lessened to flurries, Maya decided to explore the perimeter of the cabin more thorough. The days stretched on, the storm gradually loosening its grip. The bond between Maya and Storm grew deeper, a mutual dependence forged by necessity and genuine affection. Maya no longer thought of Storm as just a stray pup. He was her companion, her confidant in the silence. In their shared isolation, she found a strength she hadn't known existed, a resilience born from their interwoven survival. Their days followed a rhythm, cautious forays outside, gathering firewood, melting snow, and huddling together for warmth. Each day was a step closer to the storm's end, a step closer to a world beyond the cabin's wooden walls. And yet, a part of Maya knew that this experience, this bond with Storm, would linger long after the snow had melted. As dawn broke one morning, clear and bright, Maya stepped outside to find the storm had finally passed. The landscape lay blanketed in snow, pristine and glistening under the sun. The silence was profound, a peaceful contrast to the tempest that had held them captive. Storm barked softly, his tail wagging, a reflection of the newfound hope that stirred within her. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to believe that they would make it out of the wilderness, not just as survivors, but as partners. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but together, she and Storm had already conquered the worst the storm had to offer. They had faced the wilderness and emerged not as victims but as a team, bound by survival and trust. The relentless storm that had trapped Maya and Storm finally broke after days of uncertainty. The morning sun crept slowly over the snow-covered peaks, illuminating the mountains with a soft, golden light. The air was sharp and frigid, but the sky was clear, a vast, endless blue that seemed to stretch on forever. It was a sight that would have taken Maya's breath away on any other day, but today it felt like a signal, a promise of hope. Maya stood at the cabin's threshold, Storm at her side. The pup's ears perked up as he gazed out at the world that had been hidden behind a curtain of snow for what felt like an eternity. His tail wagged gently, an instinctive response to the shift in their circumstances. Maya took a deep breath, the cold air biting at her lungs, and looked down at Storm. "Looks like it's time, buddy," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension. Storm looked up at her, his icy blue eyes reflecting the morning light. The bond they had formed felt almost surreal, a connection forged through survival and shared vulnerability. Maya knew they couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The supplies she had left were dwindling, and the reality of being stranded without communication had weighed heavily on her. She carefully repacked her belongings, her fingers still stiff from the cold. Storm watched her intently, his head tilting as if trying to understand the preparation. As they stepped out into the open, the snow crunched beneath their feet, a sound that had once been comforting but now felt like a challenge. The landscape was transformed, the blizzard's chaos now replaced by a serene, pristine white. Everything seemed so still, yet ominous. The sun hung low, its rays glimmering off the snow's surface, blindingly bright yet cold. Maya's sense of direction was compromised by the endless white, but she relied on her instincts and the remnants of her map, now dry and crumpled. Each step was deliberate, each decision weighed. Storm trotted beside her, his small frame darting back and forth, his nose buried in the snow at intervals. His presence was both comforting and a responsibility. Maya realized that just as Storm had relied on her, she now relied on him, a silent partnership navigating the wilderness. Hours slipped away, the sun arching slowly across the sky. The silence of the landscape was both a blessing and a curse. Without the oppressive, howling wind, Maya could think clearly, but the emptiness around her also meant isolation. She began to doubt her sense of direction, uncertainty nibbling at her thoughts. The mountains were magnificent yet intimidating, vast and indifferent to her struggle. Just as despair began to creep in, a sound broke through the silence, a distant mechanical hum. Maya's heart leaped, her breath catching in her throat. She strained her ears, questioning whether it was real or just her mind playing tricks. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was unmistakable, the hum of a snowmobile. Adrenaline surged through her veins, and she called out, her voice cracking from exhaustion and cold. Storm's ears perked, and he barked, a sharp, eager sound that echoed through the still air. Maya's shouts grew louder, her arms waving frantically. The snowmobile's silhouette emerged from behind a ridge, two figures clad in thick winter gear steering toward her. Relief surged through her, overwhelming and bittersweet. The rescuers, a pair of park rangers, dismounted, their faces weathered but kind. They asked questions, how long she had been out there, if she was injured, but their words blurred as the weight of survival finally eased. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in Maya's eyes as she realized they were truly safe. Storm stayed close to her side, his eyes watchful yet curious. One of the rangers crouched, his gloved hand reaching out to the pup. Storm sniffed cautiously, then allowed a gentle pat on his head. The ranger exchanged a glance with his partner, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "This pup, we've been looking for him," the ranger said, his voice thoughtful. "A family reported him missing about a week ago. Thought he might have been lost for good." Maya's heart twisted. The idea of parting with Storm felt unbearable, a loss that cut deeper than she expected. She looked down at the husky, his trusting eyes meeting hers. In their short time together, he had been more than just a companion. He had been her anchor, a reason to keep pushing forward. The rangers guided Maya and Storm back to the town's ranger station, a small, sturdy building warmed by a crackling fireplace. The smell of burning wood filled the air, a comfort that settled deep within her. Storm, however, seemed restless, his gaze shifting to the door as if he understood that something significant awaited him. News of Storm's rescue spread quickly. It wasn't long before a family arrived, a couple and a young boy with wide, hopeful eyes. The boy's face lit up when he saw Storm, his voice breaking as he called the pup's name. "Echo!" Storm's ears perked, his body tensing for a moment before he bounded toward the boy, tail wagging furiously. The reunion was a whirlwind of joy, laughter, and tears. Maya watched, a smile trembling on her lips, her chest heavy with emotion. She saw the love between the boy and Storm, a bond that ran deep despite the days of separation. Returning Storm was both a relief and a heartbreak. The mountains had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, pushing her to her limits. Yet, in the cold and isolation, she had found a part of herself she hadn't known existed. A strength and resilience tempered by fear and the silent companionship of a lost husky. The family thanked Maya profusely, their gratitude evident in their tearful embraces. The boy clung to Storm, his arms wrapped tightly around the pup's neck. Storm's blue eyes met Maya's once more, a flicker of understanding passing between them, a silent goodbye. As she prepared to leave the snowy town, Maya's heart felt both full and hollow. The snow-capped peaks that had loomed so threateningly now seemed gentler, a reminder of the bond she had forged in their shadow. The memory of Storm would stay with her, a symbol of survival, of unexpected companionship, and of the profound impact a single creature could have on a person's heart. Maya's journey home felt different. The noise of the city, the rush of daily life, they no longer seemed as overwhelming. The mountains had changed her, softened her edges, and reminded her of the power of connection, even in the most desolate of places. Storm, with his sky-blue eyes, would always be a part of that story, a companion found in the heart of a storm,